There are 43 sentences, and what it's asking you to do is to make a correction if it's needed. If it's not needed, you can just circle it and show that it's correct. We're going to give you a few minutes to work on this. It's okay, you don't get it all finished. But this helps us because it lets us all know what we need to work on. Okay, so this is basically a tool for you to use to figure out what are your strengths and weaknesses regarding the ACT English exam. If you look past number 43, it will go over all of the answers and it explains all the answers as well. So I'm not going to go through all of this because you can easily do that on your own, and we want to give you as much information as possible. But I do want you to turn to the last page. There is something called a study chart. This chart breaks down the ACT into different sections. And it breaks down those numbers that you just completed, those sentences you just completed, into those sections. So like you can see, for run-on sentences and comma splices, those are tested, assessed, you can say, questions 1, 2, and 3 that you just did. So if you missed the first 3 questions, you know, okay, I really need to work on run-on sentences and comma splices. That's an area of weakness for me. If you ace those, maybe you're good on that section. But this allows you to see what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Now there's another column that says pages to study then. This is from a huge, huge study packet of information. My students know this because they have been receiving those packets in different increments. And I think they kind of have a love-hate relationship with them because 1, yes, they are very, very helpful. 2, it's more work for them. But here's the thing. On this sheet up here, I have a sign-up sheet. If you want access to those packets and you want that study material, I will get them to you. All you have to do is decide which sections, and you can put your name on all 4, that's fine, which sections you would want, write your name down, and I'm going to make copies, and then they'll be ready to go on Monday. So you could come by my room and pick them up on Monday. Does that make sense to everyone? So you can look on this study chart, it breaks it down. Sentence structure, grammar and usage, punctuation, and rhetorical skills. Now, let me draw your attention to rhetorical skills. Everyone see it? There are no question numbers listed under rhetorical skills. That's because these are the types of questions that ask about whole passages or parts of the passage, paragraphs. So we couldn't assess that in just singular sentences. But, as it tells you, everyone should review this section. Those are those higher level thinking questions which Mr. Whitmore is going to talk about in just a little bit. So if you want that section as well to practice, you can sign up for it and I will get them made for you. I didn't make copies for today because I didn't know how many to make. And they're pretty big. Abby, you have some of yours out. Hold one up. Hold up chapter 4 for us.
Oh.
Wave it around. Let them hear the thickness. It's large. So I don't want to waste paper. If you want that though, it's not going to be a waste. It would have to be in your own time, but the good thing about these packets, John, can you guys see that? Not only does it just have practice questions, that's not the good thing about this. It will teach you. So if you don't know about adverbs, it will teach you about adverbs, and then you do a little practice. And at the end of each section, there's a subtest, so you get more practice doing those tests. And all the answers are in the back, so you can check to see if you are doing it correctly. And it explains the answers. Abby, what were you going to say?
Over half of it is enigmatic questions.
Yeah, over half is just instructional material that you can read up on. Especially on this grammar stuff, we don't always get to a lot of it in our classrooms because we have so much other stuff that we have to do. So getting to go through it again and hit the things that you may not know, and maybe you've been afraid to ask before what certain things are, could be very beneficial for you. Because as we're going to tell you, the English section is all about this grammar and punctuation and all of those skills more so than the higher level standards that we do in class. Okay, so it's a little bit different. Any questions about how to use the inventory or the study chart? Does it make sense to everyone? Okay, so then we're going to go over some general strategies with you for the English section. Ta-da!
I'm going to have to step back there and put this on the slide.
Oh,
Some of you were probably here a couple weeks ago and might have heard a lot of these same things, but it's always good to just cover some general strategies about the ACT. It's a much different type of test than you would have ever taken in the classroom. Number one, you can just pick up wherever you want to. Number one, working the test booklet nonstop. I saw a lot of people, as we asked you to answer or correct 40 sentences, like some people like looked around the room, and some of you, I know some of you already done this, but like others kind of chatted. Okay, like you should not be doing anything else in the ACT other than working. I even noticed like teaching the after-school prep course. I don't know if any of you in here went to that, but like a lot of times people will rush through and then be like, yeah, now I got extra time to take a nap or whatever. But like, you really need to make sure that you have worked to the best of your ability. That means like spend extra time like rereading the passages. Maybe you've marked a couple of questions that were difficult for you the first time through, so you're going to take a second look at them. Okay, whatever you can do in that 45 minutes during the English section, like use that to the best of your ability to its fullest extent.
And especially on the English portion, I notice a lot. So when I do practice tests in my classroom, on the reading section, people take most of the time. On the English sections, people finish pretty early and then they just sit there. You don't ever want to waste that extra time. A lot of these questions are meant to be tricky. So if you don't take your time looking at it, you may have made a silly mistake that you actually know the answer to. So if you get to go back and look at those questions, you need to go back and look at those questions to make sure that you didn't make one of those silly mistakes.
All right, we're going to look at these in just a second. Not quite yet. But number two, circle answers in the test booklet, then transfer onto the answer sheet. You can do this like 5 at a time. You can do this by passage. A lot of my students like doing it per passage. Yeah. That's always a good tip to help you save some time. Don't answer like all 70 questions and then transfer them, but it would go quicker and more quickly if you answered and then transferred more into the booklet.
Does anyone know how many passages are on the English portion?
4.
That's 4 is for reading, right?
2,
5.
5,
5. They're shorter. They're much shorter than the reading passages.
Number 3, the 5-minute notification. Your proctor will yell it out. 5 minutes remaining. At that point, it would be good for you to start guessing. You've probably gone through the test at least once, and you should have left some blank if you didn't know the answers, right? At that point, it's a good idea to either go through it and take one final attempt to get it right, or start guessing. Number 4 goes along with it. Pick a go-to letter to guess. Some people stay away from options A and D, but as long as you pick one. So like if I know every time I don't know an answer, I'm going to guess C, then I guess C on every single one. Number 5 is really important, especially on the English section. You notice that numbers 30, 31, the thing I just passed out, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37 all have a no change option, okay? If you can't, in your vast knowledge of the English language, justify a change that should be made from what you've read, pick no change, okay? Don't just pick something like just because you think it sounds good, okay? Because a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, not more often than not, but like the no change option is something that like is the correct answer. They actually use that.
So unless you know the rule or why you would change it, it probably doesn't need to change. Okay?
Okay, number 6 is going to make a lot more sense in just a second, but skip time eaters. That's what we're going to call them. The first time through the test, we recommend, Ms. Reap, Mr. Hilton, and myself recommend, this timeline isn't written down anywhere for you, so you might want to write this down on one of those sheets. Take about 1.5 to 2 minutes to read each passage. It's not a reading section type passage. You're not trying to get like plot information, or like on the first section, the first reading of this test that you took in January, it was like about morel mushrooms. Okay, you don't need information about morel mushrooms, but you're trying to like get a sense of like the tense, the tone, some rhetorical information. Okay, maybe what the author's doing rhetorically. You're getting an idea of like that type of stuff in the passage. A little bit different from what you're focusing on in the reading passage. Okay, take about 1.5 minutes to read each passage. Number 2, answer the Bing questions. Then on the second time through the test, you might be able to read it again and then answer the time meters. Okay, again.
You will go over what big questions
Yeah.
and types are in just a second.
probably doesn't make sense right now. And then number 7, pay close attention to what is changing in each of the answer options. Look at number 30 really quick. Again, proximity to instructor. Sorry, that's my fault. Actually, never mind. Look at 31. Option A is no change. Option B is that catered. Option C is while catering, and option D is and catered. Okay? So, paying attention to the thing that is changing, like what is it? Thank you.
What's changing in those answer choices?
The tense.
Yeah, the verb tense, right? So, that question is probably a question about verb tense. Okay? That's what they're asking you to do. Okay, it might also help you to pay attention to the underlined portion, the sentence with a number next to it, and this is also just good for you guys to examine beings and time meters in a second and get an idea for what the English section actually looks like. We're not going to talk about this slide. That was nice for class. Okay. Left-hand side, being type question, what we're going to talk about first. You might look at this ACT copy. You'll be able to identify these primarily because they don't actually ask you a question, right? They've just directed you to either a sentence or a part of that paragraph, and they're asking you to look at a part of that, like number 31, a verb tense question, okay? We call these bings because it's like, picture you work at a counter, right, somewhere, I don't know, maybe you work at a bank or a bank teller, and someone has a bell, and they come up and ring the bell. Bing, 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 bing. You guys ever see Men in Black? The point where the alien is like, ringing the bell. Bing, 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 bing.
Did you say awesome?
Yeah,
Okay. I was afraid you were going to say old.
We didn't make this up. Anyway, that's a sound it's supposed to make in your head when you see this type of question. Either you know it, and you're like, oh, comma rules, I remember comma rules. We learned about comma splices in Miss Reeves' class. Yay, I'm going to know this question. Or you don't know it, okay? Look at number 31. If you don't know anything about verb tense, okay? I mean, you might be able to say it in your head, and you're like, oh, this sounds like it might be right. Like, you might be able to maybe figure it out, but chances are you're not going to be able to figure it out, right? So if you see a being type question, a question especially like that, like it doesn't have an actual question asked, then you should either answer it, if you know the answer, or skip it and come back to it later, or make that one of your guesses. Okay, I'm going to say it one more time. You get a being type question, you're not going to be able to think through it, you're not going to be able to like think your way to the answer, so you should either skip it, just like write that one off, okay, and make that a guess, or save that while you come through the test a second time, okay?
He's saying don't spend too much time trying to figure out the rules for verb tense if you don't know the rules for verb
Exactly.
tense.
It'll just lose you time, okay? And these types of questions aren't designed to have time spent on them, okay? Some other stuff about being type questions. Number 1, these are more lower level depth of knowledge questions, like very simple, that's not right. They're asking you about like maybe grammatical rules. Doesn't mean these questions are easier. Okay? It just means like either you know it or you don't. Either you can recall or you can't recall. Okay? Maybe you just don't remember it. Number 2, this is about 75% of the English exam. So like around 60 of the 75 questions are going to be like basic grammatical information.
Which is comforting to you if you can study those grammar rules.
Yeah. So for example, transitions. My class, we went over transitions not too long ago. There was a point for that. Prepositions, prepositional phrases, word usage, verb tense, rhetorical questions would not be in this. Don't pay attention to rhetorical questions. Answer these first. On the left-hand side, right-hand side, time meters. This is nearly everything else. So a question like, let's look at an example of a time meter. Number 42. That's an easy one, or not an easy one, but a good example of a time meter. It says, the writer is thinking of adding the following phrase to the end of the preceding sentence, changing the period after industries to a comma, such as medicine, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals. Should the writer make this addition here? Okay, like, that not only is asking you to like demonstrate the knowledge, Mr. Lee, about grammatical skills, but also asking you to like have read that previous passage, have understood what that passage is talking about, and to have conceptualized the layout of that passage, and to decide whether or not that writer should add that. Do you guys understand how like that would take you a much longer time? Not only that, but you might be able to figure that out by spending extra time on it, versus a question about verb tense. Like spending extra time on that would not benefit you. Okay. So like the ACT does that on purpose. That's a question that like you should spend time on, which warrants time being spent on it. The Bing type questions do not. Okay? Does that make sense? If this was a classroom, we would have you practice identifying them right now. However, it's not. We don't have a whole lot of extra time to play with today.
And one of the easiest ways to identify it, like Mr. Whitmore said earlier, the numbers that don't have an actual question written down, more than likely are going to be Bing type questions, and then the numbers that have actual questions written down probably be a time eater type question. And I know that's something that when my students first got done taking that practice ACT, they came back and said, some of the questions didn't even have questions with it, and it was very confusing. That just means that you're trying to correct a possible error in that portion of the text. Everyone understood that part, right? That you were familiar with the text first.
Any questions about anything so far? Side people? Sir in the back, Brett, any questions? No?
Great.
This slide, do you guys ever get access to this? I'm trying to make that happen. I still haven't sent an email that. That's good. Anyway, this is where I got all this information from. You can just click on those links, and those would be good resources for you to go and access. You could also just Google English tips. It would probably generate some examples. But these next 10 rules are what I thought were like the best that I could find. Okay? You might get out some paper to write these down. I guess we don't have paper provided.
You can write on.
You can write on these.
These are yours to keep, so you can write all of it. Or no book if you have it.
We'll allow you guys some time to translate.
Could you, like, afterwards, like, if you are still doing, could you send how to set this?
Yes. These are not empty forms.
Okay, number one. Tip number one, the best thing that we can give you, or one of the 10 best things we can give you. As far as the ACT is concerned, think simple. The ACT answers are going to be along the lines of the best writing uses the fewest possible number of words to convey the same idea. Again, the fewest possible number of words that can convey the same exact idea is the best answer.
And make sure you pay attention to this because I know a lot of you have heard a different strategy for non-ACT English tests. You've heard the longest answer is more likely to be the right one, right? You've all heard that test strategy before for other multiple choice tests. This is the opposite for ACT English. And oftentimes we think, oh, the more words, the more eloquent it is. Wrong. Simple, 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 simple.
So, that doesn't mean always that the shortest answer is the best answer, but it's the shortest answer that gives the same information. Also, in general, avoid answers that seem wordy. If you're like, who would say this like this? That's probably not the correct answer. Let's read number 24 real quick. This is number 24 off the practice ACT that you took in January.
Anyone want to read it for us? Oh, come on.
I guess I will.
Oh, thank you.
The features of birds that help them accomplish their long migrations are aerodynamic design, acute vision, and the ability to regulate their body temperature and maintain energy.
Thank you, sir.
Good. The options. A, no change. B, and regulating body temperature and maintaining energy with their ability. C, with their body temperature, period, regulation and energy maintenance ability. D, and the regulation of body temperature and their ability to maintain energy.
Any guesses? How many people think A? Raise your hand. B? Raise your hand. C? D? Drum roll, please, Mr. Whitmore.
weakness of these options definitely doesn't make sense. There's a grammar error in C. That was a legit option. I didn't make that mistake.
Good.
With their ability, B, that's how that ends. That wouldn't make sense. D is extra wordy. A is the best choice. Yeah. Go ahead. You can just read it. Oh, okay. Number 2, take the whole sentence into account. A lot of times, and if you guys were to look on that other sheet, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 words underlined. However, it is good to still have the whole context of the sentence. Okay? It's easy to read just the underlined portion and think, oh, thank God. There's only 1 line or 1 word underlined here. This is going to be a really easy question. Yeah, not necessarily. Make sure you read the entire sentence.
For example, we pointed out a question that was about verb tense earlier. If they had only underlined the verb, you would have to know not only that sentence, but maybe a couple sentences around it to see what tense it was in originally, because it needs to be consistent, right? So that would be an example of when you need to take the whole sentence into account, and sometimes even sentences around it. Be aware of context and meaning when necessary. So it may seem like the meaning of the passage is unimportant, since these are just grammar questions, but just like we were talking about, sometimes the way the rest of everything is written is going to influence an answer choice. For a question that asks you to choose the best opposing sentence, you're going to need to know what the passage is about in order to figure out what would be the best opposing sentence. And like I was kind of mentioning earlier, a lot of times it's not just about the entire passage. They have sentences saying, the author is thinking about adding a sentence into this paragraph. Which sentence would be the best to add to that paragraph? So you would have to have an understanding of that entire paragraph to know which sentence would be best to add to that paragraph. So reading the passages, like we said in this first minute and a half, is your best option.
Questions over these first 3?
Got 7. Look for consistency. Look for consistency. So generally you want to keep things such as verb tense and voice consistent. If you're picking the tense of a verb, look at the surrounding sentences to see what tense they are in. And as you can see with the examples we've been giving, a lot of these strategies overlap, which is good. We're not asking you to have to memorize all 10 strategies, but keep these things in mind. Now,
So, keeping verb tense consistent here. Here's an example. Number 71. Anyone want to read this for us? Or do you just want me to? Let's get some audience
involvement, I think so.
Bree, thanks for volunteering. Can you read some 71 for me?
Yeah.
You're the best.
For instance, his photos of Memphis's Vale Street jazz and blues musicians includes the likes of B.B. King, Aretha Franklin, and Elvis Presley.
Okay. So, what is being included here? Is it what word would this refer to? Yeah, photos. Very good. So, would we want to say that his photos includes? His photos does include, his photos including, or his photos included. Here's a good strategy that's not plugged in there in this PowerPoint, but I cut out some of that middle stuff.
D.
Yeah, very good. His photo, or his photos would include. Okay? So since photos is plural, we don't want to have an S at the end of that verb. Does that make sense?
So this, a lot of times, especially with subject-verb agreement questions, they will purposefully stick phrases or clauses in between the subject and the verb to try to confuse you. So you have to, in your mind, take those phrases or clauses out between the subject and the verb in order for you to be able to see it. Because you know how that should sound if you were to just say, his photos include. But when you add all that other stuff in there, your brain gets confused and forgets about what that original verb is, or sorry, that subject is. So cut it out, and it makes it much easier for brain to see. Who knows what redundancy is? Anybody? Well, the ACT hates redundancy. They do not like it, so you want to avoid redundancy. If something has already been stated or implied, don't state it again, and we'll have an example in a second. There's no need for two adjectives that mean the same thing, or any other type of redundancy. This rule also falls under keeping it simple. So for example, our example, Amelia, use that for me, 41.
My grandmother's cat was nimble, quick on its feet, and graceful.
Okay, so we already told you it's a redundancy issue. So the answer A, no change. Nimble and graceful. Graceful or nimble? What's being repeated here? They're explaining nimble again, right? Quick on its feet is basically the definition for nimble. So you don't need both of those. So the correct answer would be B, nimble and graceful.
Definitely. Can anybody explain to me why it wouldn't be C or D?
Because it leaves information out.
Because it leaves information out.
Yeah, good. Graceful and nimble mean different things. However, nimble and then quick on its feet mean the same thing. Okay, we need to make sure that we include information about the cat being nimble and about it being graceful. Okay, that's why it wouldn't just be C or D.
So this is a good example of when we're saying you need to keep it simple, it doesn't always mean the shortest answer, right? B is not the shortest answer, but it's the shortest answer that has all of the necessary information, right? So redundancy is saying things like, Amelia is very smart and intelligent. Why would I need to do that? I just said she's smart. I don't need to say she's intelligent. It means simple. Keep things parallel. I know you know what parallel means, right? From two different subjects even. We hit you up with both ends with the word parallel. What does it mean? Not math terms.
It's kind of like the same tense. Like if you have an ing at the end of the verb, you want another ing at the
Yeah,
at
it's
the other.
keeping that pattern in how you phrase things. So for a sentence to be parallel, the clauses within it must have matching structure. It's all about structure. Here's an example of a sentence that is not parallel. My favorite things to do are running, swimming, and to read. What's wrong with that? Why is that not parallel?
Two are congregated, where the last one is something.
Right, so we have running, swimming, and then all of a sudden to read. We have an infinitive in there. We don't need that. So how could you fix it?
Reading.
And reading.
Reading.
Or to run, swim, and read would also work.
You guys think you're ready to tackle this example? This is another example from that ACT that you took. I didn't make this up. It says, he also sent Duncan Yo-Yo professionals around the country, demonstrating tricks and sponsoring contests. So, this one kind of goes like, this is maybe a deep example to talk about parallelism. But who would be doing the demonstrating tricks and sponsoring contests here? Yeah, the yo-yo professionals. So he would be sending the Duncan Yo-Yo professionals, but the Duncan Yo-Yo professionals are demonstrating tricks and sponsoring contests. Okay? So the stuff that the Duncan Yo-Yo professionals are doing need to be parallel. And then the stuff that he was doing, had he been doing multiple things, would also need to be parallel. However, he's only doing one thing. So knowing that, would it be A, no change, B, in order to demonstrate, C, we demonstrated, and then D, yet demonstrated? Yeah, it's A, that's no change. Yeah. Because demonstrating and sponsoring. Good. Number 7, watch for run-on sentences. There should be a lot of tools in your bag to fix run-on sentences. I'll read some of this off here. Comma splices are common mistakes in everyday writing. They might not jump out to you as much as they do us English teachers on the ACT. But basically, a comma splice is when a comma has been like slipped into a sentence in order to separate independent clauses, right? Independent clause being anything with a subject and a verb inside of it. Okay.
These are big. We often see these mistakes, especially on ACT questions. When we talk about, in my classes, our areas of weakness, almost every student says consequences. We don't recognize them as easily because a lot of times we use them not knowing. So you can't just take two sentences and put them together with a comma. It doesn't work.
Okay. So here's an example. Sarah obviously named that one. That's a complete sentence. She was a sucker for those old Happy Days reruns. That's also a complete sentence. I need some other stuff there. I can't just put a comma in there and call it a day. Normally, I would tell my students add a fanboy. So the word in conjunction, for, in, nor, but, or, yet, or so. Okay? None of those really make sense there. You need to replace the comma with a period, or by not making sense there, I mean to like convey the same message that that sentence is trying to convey. You could do some other stuff. There might be adding a period. You could add a semicolon. Some other stuff there. There's another example down there. Squiggly ran in the forest, aardvark, chase the peeves. You could add a fanboy into that one. Go ahead, Ms. Reed. Only a couple more, guys. Bear with us. Bear with us. Quinn Lee, come on. Number 8, make sure the subjects and the verbs agree. We had one like this earlier, but plural subjects need plural verbs. Pretend there's like a floating S out there. You guys know anything about valent electrons? Think of it as like a valent electron. Either the subject needs an S or the verb needs an S. So students sit, but the student sits. Okay. Anyway, that's what that's saying. Any questions? I'll do the last one. Pronoun antecedent agreement. Let's say if I had Mr. Whitmore is a total nerd. He likes reading books. What would be the pronoun? He. What's the antecedent? Mr. Whitmore, yeah. The antecedent is just the word that the pronoun is replacing. So up here, what have I done? I don't know where I got these examples from. But what I've told my students to do is on a test like the ACT, if they're asking a question about pronoun antecedent agreement, and if it's like ever gotten confusing what antecedent that this pronoun is referring to, just draw arrows. Okay, you can write all over that test booklet. Like you can draw pictures if you wanted to. Like the ACT score people are not going to look at that. Okay, so from they over here, I've drawn an arrow to the students. You can do that. That might help things make sense to you in a way that is maybe more efficient, quicker for you to deal with. Anything to add? Okay. You can take the last one.
Check that transitional sentences include ideas from the current and previous or following paragraph. So with transitions, you need to make sure that the purpose of a transition is to connect ideas, right? So they must include information from those surrounding ideas in order to do their job successfully. Often you're going to have to pick the best opening or closing sentence of a paragraph. Best choice almost always creates a smooth transition by including ideas from both the current and the previous or following, depending on what they're asking you to do. Does that make sense? So for transitions, does it include that information? If so, it's probably the best choice. I'm going to be handing out a grammar, punctuation, quick reference sheet to each of you. This should be your best friend until the ACT. Okay? This is got some brief information, as brief as you can get when it gets to English language and grammar, because there's so many exceptions, you know. But quick rules that you can look back on to study. It's got almost all the things we've talked about today, and some of those tricky little things. Like for example, we talked about in my classes, the words everybody, the word everybody, that word is singular. Right? So we were just talking about keeping things consistent. The word everybody is singular, so anytime you are referring to it, it needs to be singular, even though it's talking about more than one person. So this packet has all that information in it. It's also got commonly confused words, apostrophes, which I know sometimes we struggle with, especially those plural and possessive. It's got parallelism, modifiers. Modifiers are also a big one on the ACT. We have some common rules. I would look at fragments and run-on page. It's going to give you a lot of helpful information. It's got those comma rules that we know we always get confused because there's so many. It's got subject verb agreement, pronouns, and organization. So it kind of focuses on all those little topics. Study this, it will help you. If you want extra study sheets, like the one I gave to my students that I was referring to that go with this topic inventory, you can come sign up for it. Also on the back of this page, don't mind things that are scratched out, you can write your email if you'd like a copy of this PowerPoint. Okay? Any questions? If you want copies of those practices, again, write your name down under any section you want, put all of them under all 4 sections, and they'll be ready on Monday. You can come by my room, room 406. Does everyone know where that's at? Fantastic. Thank you guys for coming.